Welcome to the Tech Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Hume, founder of Hume Consulting, specializing in digital infrastructure, technical diligence, and next-gen cooling solutions. Tech Insider discusses leadership, strategy, and technology trends with industry-leading executives around the world. In today's episode, I sit down with Walt Coulston. Walt is the founder and CEO of GreenSquareDC, an emerging player in the sustainable data center industry based in Australia. Walt joins me on the show to discuss digital infrastructure, sustainability, and nuclear energy through an Asia-Pacific lens. Join the conversation as we explore the challenges in creating eco-friendly data centers with one of the nicest guys in the industry. And yes, he's also Australian. Enjoy. Walt, thanks for joining us on the show, and great to talk to you.
Nick, thank you so much for the invitation, mate. And congrats too on this podcast. I've listened to the first two that have dropped and they've been fabulous. So congrats, mate.
Oh, thanks. There's a few more in the hopper, actually. So
Yeah.
I've been very lucky with the first round of folks I reached out to, and you know, I got to meet you in person, I think at GTC earlier this year, and so I reached out to a kind of I hope a good plethora and a good spectrum of folks across the world, but equally in different industries as well. That would be, I think, interesting. I find interesting, so hopefully that's for the folks watching, that they get some knowledge and some insights into things that, you know, you're working on, and we can kind of just surface those things.
Yeah, 100%, mate.
Cool. So tell us about yourself. Funnily enough, and you know, you're not from Perth, even though many people think you're from Perth. So how did that come about? So let's start with you. So tell us about you. You know, tell us about GreenSquare, the journey to today. Like, let's just do a little quick intro there.
Okay, mate. Yeah, and thanks, Nick. Look, Walt Coulston, founder and CEO of GreenSquareDC. We're I still say a new entrant into the data center market. We are a AI-based and focused platform with a real focus on sustainability. We've got 5 pillars to sustainability that we're baking in from day one. And look, I sort of came to this. Everyone comes to the data center industry and sector from all sorts of different ways. Mine is maybe not unique, that I come from a property background. So I'm a sort of a 20-year property developer and investor veteran based in Australia, originally from country New South Wales, so not from Perth, but
actually, just whereabouts country New South Wales? Just
Parks.
Oh, Parks, very nice.
Parks is like sort of
a satellite city.
What's that?
The satellite. Well, the satellites for
the dish. The dish really put us on the map.
That's it.
When I first moved to Sydney, the dish, the movie hadn't come out yet. No one had ever heard of it. And then after that, everyone's like, "Oh, the dish." Anyway, and look, so live in Sydney, but really a lot of the projects and developments we've done over the last sort of 10 or so years at least has sort of been spread out all over the country. And look, I just sort of had a chance, almost by chance, opportunity to deal with one of the big global data center operators from a property perspective too, not even from an operational perspective. And this is maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And it just gave me an appreciation of the industry. I didn't really know very much before that. It's not as if I walked away and knew everything. I'm sure I still don't. But it just, and keep in mind, you know, it's an order of magnitude different now, of course, Nick, that I think we all appreciate. But even then, I could sense what it was. I could sense, you know, like I've always, you know, I'm probably like a moth to a flame. I've always been attracted to the things that grow fast. But I've also learned from experience that be careful of anything that ends in boom. You know, if you've been in property long enough, you've ridden a boom or 2 or 3, and anything that ends in boom generally doesn't end that well. And the one thing is, and this is a real generalization, and that doesn't mean there won't be cycles and there won't be, you know, it's not always up all the time. Of course, nothing is, but there's not too many people out there kind of calling this the data boom, the digitalization boom, that ends in a bust, which is really interesting. So I sort of came at it that way. And I guess, look, I walked away from that sort of, I'll call it a chance encounter, thinking, wow, I could really see myself being in this industry, participating in it, but only on the basis that I could be somewhat differentiated. I sort of looked around the Australian data center landscape, and we've got some real world-class operators. You know, you look at your
Definitely.
Next DCs, your Air Trunks, your Canberra data centers, they are world-class operators at what they do. So I didn't want to just try and sort of ball up, try and get a site next to them and hope someone picked me just out of luck, right? That was
Sure.
never really going to work very well. Not a great investment thesis. So it was really, and look, Nick, it was really sort of during COVID that I said, you know, we're all probably had a little bit of downtime, which is a little bit unusual for most of us that are busy most of the time. And it sort of really, that's when the wheels really started to spin about, well, and I really dialed down into what are the change agents that I see that are likely to impact this industry that I could maybe come in, and maybe they could be my differentiation factors that I could then build a business case on, and et cetera, et cetera. And
Sure.
I really came to the conclusion that, as far as I could tell, the two main change agents in this industry were decarbonisation and sustainability. And I think that holds true to really any heavy emitter type industry. And I think, if we're all honest, I think we all know that, you know, data centers have an environmental footprint, and that's just
Absolutely.
the way it is. It's something that, you know, we as an industry all need to improve. So that was one, and I sense that's sort of a no-brainer. The second one that I landed on was the you know, density and changes in the white space and the Moore's law and the, you know, air, its edge of its capacity to reject the heat and all that kind of stuff, Nick. And look, we all know that had been a long-held argument, and so that's really what I landed on. They were my two key fundamental tenets that I then built my business case around. And so I'm giving you the long version here, Nick. My apologies.
That's okay. That's all right.
I'll try and speed it up. So look, it was December 21 that I registered the business. It was probably like mid 22. I sort of started, you know, that was my, you know, I started onboarding people and started, you know, sort of building the team, and that's, you know, we started really building the engineering then too, really for a sort of a more like sort of out of the box, more sustainable. And if you sort of build it from the ground up, you can do better. You know, we all know that net zero is not tomorrow, and that's why it's a sort of a, you know, 2050 goal. But you can do better if you build it from the ground up with kind of tomorrow in mind, not yesterday in mind, if you know what I mean. And so it was then, so we started building, you know, engineering and a bit of a platform and onboarding, and really, mate, the big change agent, I guess, has been for us, you know, the day that ChatGPT 3 dropped in, you know, November 22.
Sure.
And when I started the business, I'd never heard of a large language model or generative AI or any of that kind of stuff. When that dropped and we got a head around it, we're like, no, this is the change agent. So even if now we're calling ourselves an AI platform, so, you know, I feel as though the business was born for that, even though at the time it didn't really know that that's what it was going to be doing. So if it is a pivot, it's a pretty soft pivot.
Totally.
And that's moving forward, you know, we probably spent much of last year, like a lot of people, just watching this kind of density curve increase and where's it going to end. And that was impacting our design. And, you know, because when you're doing something from a greenfield perspective, the density in the white space is really, it's a real opportunity to do some great things and to, you know, drop your embodied carbon and be more efficient and even, you know, improve your price and your delivery timeframes and stuff like that. But it's also a challenge when you're not quite sure where the density is kind of at, because you don't want to, you know, either over or grossly
Absolutely.
over or grossly
Oversubscribe,
underbuild.
undersubscribe, and overbuild.
Yeah,
And, you know,
correct. So thankfully, one of our first projects is a brownfield that the building is already there. So that kind of at least takes that guesswork out of it, which in many ways is a real benefit. So anyway, so that's, sorry, Nick, that was kind of the long version, but
no, that's good. It's good. Like, I think it's interesting to understand the background, obviously, to the why, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you know,
The
where,
why is always important.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And then you came from a property background, so there's a lot of you bring over a lot of, you know, institutional knowledge in that sector into this sector. So how have you
Yeah.
found some of that experience and knowledge and skill transfer kind of applying in the new world?
Look, I find it, I have a bit of a crass saying, I hope you don't mind me saying. You can edit this out later, but
Please.
I've always kind of said, unless you can
I'm not that good at
find a
editor
site,
or
have a
producer of
site,
my own podcast.
you don't really have a pot to piss in. Do you know what I mean?
All
And
good.
you can edit it out later, Nick.
No, staying in.
Really? It's okay, mate. Um, and so I guess, with that core, like one of my particular and the teams that I've built and the things we've done in the past, we've always been really good at being able to take, and I guess that's actually in truth what led us to having that chance opportunity to deal with that big global data center, brand, was because of our ability to understand an opportunity and then go and action that opportunity and turn it into a site, a development, those kind of things. Behind that, of course, then you've got to be able to, planning is important, building a team, engaging with the builders, making sure everyone is all on the journey all at the same time. And that's, I don't know. I don't think anyone's born with that, but once you've done it for 20 years and you're not really good at that many other things,
Mm,
that it really helps. But that said, now I'm in this industry, and let's be honest, there's a lot of property in a data center.
absolutely.
There's lots of stuff, especially in the middle, that's not, and there's lots of stuff outside of the property that's not. So for me, like I've been dealing with, power connections and stuff for a long time, but they've sort of been more at we'll put the kiosk over in the corner and it's kind of part of it. Whereas at the data center, all of a sudden you're dealing with high voltage and
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
much bigger, and so that's kind of outside of my skill set. So I found that for me personally, that's a bit that I've had to upskill on and certainly bring a lot more people around me. The other thing that kills me, Nick, is fiber and dark fiber. I feel as though it's a state secret. I don't know how to feel like no one's telling me about it. So
Yeah.
that, and again, normal, like we'd have connecting to NBN in Australia was always a little bit of a challenge, but there was one of those things. Whereas this, it's far more important. So it doesn't all immediately transfer over. But again, if it gives you that opportunity, and I think it's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later, is I think moving forward, there's we're going to have to sort of bring the site to the power. And I think that he or she that can control the powered sites, especially the big scalable ones. I think they're going to be the ones that are going to be in sort of pole position, and they're going to be the ones that have the highest demand, the highest opportunity. And that's then got to be deployed kind of the right way and responsibly and all that kind of stuff. But
Totally.
again, that's our skill set. And I think in the next little while, I think that's something that people will kind of appreciate. It's like, yeah, that property skill set's handy, isn't it? But it doesn't
Absolutely.
transfer over to everything. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're the greatest data center CEO ever. We've always all got to learn, right? Like
Everyone's always learning. If you
always learn.
yeah, if you're not learning, then it's just
Yeah,
atrophying. And
yeah,
everyone's learning around you. No,
yeah,
you made a good point there. I think the bringing the data center to the power has never been more an important statement than now.
yeah,
Given traditionally data centers were born in places where power was plentiful, land was cheap,
yeah,
and access to
yeah,
fiber was there, right? So you can
mhm,
see where and how those things have, you could
yeah,
pull up Google Maps and look at AWS and Microsoft's campuses and others, and you see
mm,
them, kind of aggregating in certain areas.
mm,
I think back early days of well, not early days, but maybe in the 2000s, Macquarie Telecom have got that facility in
mm,
Pitt Street, right?
yeah,
So I
yeah.
worked in that facility on and off. I didn't never work for Macquarie Telecom. I was a
All right.
client of theirs in a number of
Yeah,
different businesses. I think everyone has got a Macquarie Telecom account to some degree,
yeah, yeah. They really
being
do.
in Sydney. And but I think they had a really big outage. They're on, I think, the 14th floor or something in that tower from memory.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah,
halfway up it, and they ran out of water, right? And so, the whole thing was offline. You walk in and there was just these little portable air conditioners were all over the place, spotted around. It was a pretty bad issue at the time.
yeah,
But that was kind of a metro example of a data center that was really close, but yet most else was out in North Ryde and different facilities. Here in America, they're around the Columbia River and in, tax beneficial areas
yeah.
as well. And so, but to your point, power is becoming harder and harder to secure, to
Mm,
get at the volume that data centers need, which is increasing exponentially due to AI and
mm,
just this appetite for compute.
yeah,
And you've got to move those. There's compromises that are now being made and you're
Yeah.
finding pockets of double and triple digit, well, maybe single to double digit megawatt across the road of something else that was never intended to be a data center that now has an
Yeah.
application to go and build it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting to sort of see that. So with Green Square, so
Mm.
then you talked about sustainability,
Yep.
and a few other things like in differentiating yourself versus AirTrunk and Equinix and
Yeah.
NextDC and stuff. So
Yeah.
what's the differentiation factor? Like, is it because you're building those greenfield sites from the ground up? You talk about a brownfield site, and is it sustainable like concrete? Are you using like different materials? Is it different cooling? Like, how are you doing it
Yep.
differently?
Well,
All the
again,
above.
all the above, all above. Same, but different. Look, I think we started with this, we want to be as sustainable as we reasonably can be. And I'm sure there is such thing as overstepping the mark too. And you've got to make sure you're within the realms of where your
Well,
customer
it's
is
a
comfortable.
business too. I mean, obviously,
Of
if you can
course,
make it as sustainable as, but you have no
yeah,
business.
of course it is. And the other one, like I say, was the density play. And the density play was something that I always saw notionally, even in the early days when we were still like just drawing stuff on a page, that the higher density, these HPC workloads, which at the time were pretty niche, right? There was a pretty niche kind of thing for anything to be over 50 kilowatts a rack or something.
Sure.
Um, but the opportunity that they afford is they afford you that opportunity to really squeeze up your white space. And in doing so, that like we've had designs and builds. A DA approved data center. Again, DA approved, not built, but we had a DA approved site. Have DA approved site over in Perth for 96 megawatts. As a traditional design, it was 60, excuse me, 67,500 square meters. So nearly, like nearly 700,000
The big
square
boy.
foot.
Mm.
It's a big boy. And it was a very traditional design. It was, highly optimized, air cooled, and all your backup diesel generators and all the kind of things that all the traditional, that's the way it's done. And it was not only, it was 5 levels of 7 meters floor to floor and that kind of stuff. So a very big building. And we found sort of last year as we're kind of retracing it and sort of seeing where these densities land. Now, it depends what density you end up at, what your average rack density is, of course.
Sure.
But where we sort of ended up was, once if you got up to more like that average 50 kilowatts a rack, which is even today still reasonably aggressive, but from what we've seen over the last, if you're building now, what we've seen over the last 18 months, like just look at NVIDIA. And again, this is if you want to play in the AI space. And Nick, I don't, just as an aside, I don't believe in that notion that all of a sudden every data center in the world has to be AI enabled and has to be
Absolutely.
liquid, has to be. That is so far from the truth, I believe, because my example is if you want to run your sort of like payroll on GPUs, you won't have enough money for payroll. Do you know what I mean? There's still, I think the vast majority of workloads out there in the world are still absolutely fine to be kind of traditional compute, traditional, like low density, 8, 10 kilowatts a rack, whatever. So that said, I believe all data centers should be, there's an evolution and even from a sustainability and decarbonisation, there should be improvements made. So I'm not sort of saying that every data center in the world should just stay the way it is, but I also don't believe in the notion they've all of a sudden got to make a 180-degree turn as well.
Absolutely.
But if you want to, but again, we feel as though we were born to play in this higher density, this former niche market of AI and sort of HPC type workloads. So the first fundamental tenet of our 5 pillars of sustainability is to reduce embodied carbon. And you can, when all of a sudden you're reducing your your white space down, and I'll just finish off on that 68,500 square meter,
Oh yeah.
that was brought down to about 28,000 square meters.
Wow.
So that's a big, that's like 500,000 tons of embodied carbon right there. And if you do things like that, and let's say from there, so that also, according to Multiplex, was, I was pulling out nearly $100 million of construction. So from there, let's say you can then, because you've saved so much money and you're also saving time, Nick, that's like 3 months out of your program. So that means you're bringing forward revenues, and these things can have a reasonable EBITDA to them. So if you're bringing them forward, there's money in that. You can then afford to really seriously consider, like if green concrete is 15% more,
Yeah,
am I going to look into that? Because if I've saved all this money, like, yeah, I will reasonably look into that. But
absolutely.
if, because, and this is another thing that I think shouldn't be forgotten. COVID comes along. COVID, for me anyway, I feel as though COVID like doubled our cost and everything and halved our productivity. And I don't think that's great. I don't think that ends particularly well. I hope I'm wrong about that too, but I'm very sort of bearish on the whole impact of COVID, sort of across the board. But what it really did, and again, me coming from a property side, it managed to basically, through supply chains, everything else that's happened out there, and some very bad price gouging. And I think construction costs went up about 30%, right?
Yep.
Now, in most industries, and again, me coming from the property background, the old rule of thumb is about a 20%, return on cost. That's your kind of hurdle that everyone kind of historically has looked for.
Sure.
If things go up 30%, your margin's 20%. Now, there's more that goes into that equation. It's not great though, is it? You don't have to
No.
be a real sort of mad scientist to kind of work that out. So by bringing these costs down, one of our goals is to sort of bring our delivered cost back down to what it was pre-COVID.
Sure.
And when you're pulling out this kind of space, and you've got these kind of cost saving abilities, I believe we can do that. I think that's a really good thing. So that's kind of that's the number one. Then you move into cooling. So all of a sudden, like I say, anyone who has been following our little journey so far will know that from the very earliest days, we've been talking about, and we sort of started about immersion cooling. We still, look, personally, we still think immersion may have its place, but you know what? Our place is to serve the customer. If the customer is there for directed chip or rear door or whatever type of cooling that works
Sure.
for them and their workloads, well, that's what they're going to get because they're the customer.
But
Um,
absolutely, that being capable of supporting each of those workloads, right? So the
correct. That's
agnosticity, if that's a word, is it a
absolutely.
word? Might need to look that one up. But like
I'm going to
being
run with it.
agnostic
Nick, I'm going to run with it.
across those needs is exactly
Yeah.
where most data centers need to be.
Yeah.
Else you exclude yourself from many opportunities that would otherwise be very lucrative and
And
very, supporting of the customer need.
I can't think of another time where there's been not only the kind of the need and the ability to be flexible. If we're here having this conversation 2.5 years ago, Nick, workloads were pretty much in this kind of, as far as densities and things like that, we're
Very,
pretty much
very commoditized compute, right? So it's just you're slicing a
correct.
slice of a slice, and it's all shared
Absolutely.
infrastructure, and
Correct.
the high end was for
Yep.
the boffins in research,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that was
Couldn't,
basically it.
couldn't
Um,
agree more. Couldn't
but
agree more.
it's
And
been pulled to
yeah.
pulled in a lot.
Yes. And there's both opportunities and challenges with everything, but certainly with this too. And, I remember our earliest conversations with the folks at NVIDIA and so forth, and they were very open and honest, just going, well, this kind of infrastructure hasn't been delivered before, as certainly at this scale. And it's
Mm.
like, oh, okay, well, great. Well, let's get into it. So there's opportunities there. And as we know, if you can pull down your PUE from an average 1.3, 1.35, if everyone's being really genuinely honest about air cooling, down to somewhere close to 1.1 if you are directed chip, and it's optimized. Now, if it's blended, and we all know that you still have to move some air around too, so
Sure.
that is definitely the case, and depends on what percentage, of course. But there's efficiencies in that. There's efficiencies in, and we all. The other thing is too, PUE when it comes to liquid cooling, it's not quite. It's not quite giving you the full and complete and accurate picture, is it?
Totally, totally. I was unintentionally trolling. I wasn't trolling, but maybe that's the bad word.
Yeah.
But there was some comments about this just today actually, and folks talking about why this is, Nvidia's Jensen's basically saying, it should be
Yeah.
tokens per joule and all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like in my opinion, that's good, but that's a self-serving prophecy for an Nvidia outcome.
Yeah.
And so to
Yeah.
some degree, somewhere in the middle, and more transparency into those metrics, because let's say you've got a fantastic PUE and you could just be trashing water Like you don't
Correct.
publish your WE,
Yes.
but you're just burning
Yeah.
water at a
Yeah.
high clip,
Yes.
and just
Yes.
melting, all this stuff
Yep.
to
Yep.
satisfy one metric. And so the
Yeah.
gamification of that is there's obviously more than just the water as a lever, but you can pull things, back and forth and game systems. And so having a more complete picture of that infrastructure and those metrics and the telemetry that, like
Mm.
there's almost a responsible business type telemetry suite of
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that say, hey, I didn't kill puppies to deliver this. I didn't do this.
Mm.
All the good things that good companies and good practices,
Mm.
should show through metrics and
Yeah.
reportability, and that needs to be transparent. But
Yeah.
how far we get to a version of that
Mm.
across the globe is probably a big ask.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And it could just be as simple. And as long as if the PUE is a fair reflection for everyone and it's a level playing field for everyone. And I sort of sense right now it's sort of not. So maybe it probably can be nipped and tucked a bit, but it might just be PUE, WUE, CUE.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Power, water, carbon. If everyone is reflecting, and if they're all taken in equal measure, meaning it's no weird. And let's be honest, PUE I think was a fabulous. When it came out, Nick, 15 years
yeah,
ago
it's
or
like
whenever
20
it
years
was.
old, that thing.
Yeah, whatever it was. What a great thing, because all of a sudden it's you know what I mean. We all had something to aim for and shape and target. And yes, I think out of that we realised that oh God, our WE probably took a bit of a hit. But anyway, like always, we'll just continue to evolve and improve and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's incumbent on us anyway to be relatively straight up front about these things. However, I do think that in time, I think the legislators and financiers will very much want that anyway. So I think it'll come to the fore one way or another.
Yeah.
So I'm still getting through my differentiation, Nick. This is a very long-winded answer, isn't it? Do you want me to keep going or no?
Please do.
I'm
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
halfway.
No, keep going, keep going.
Look, renewables is nothing new. Everyone wants to be, and I think to the industry credit, the biggest consumers, purchasers, whatever you want to call them, of power purchase agreements are the hyperscalers, which they sort of should be, I believe. We don't necessarily believe, though, that just power purchase agreements in their own right they're the solution. We sort of, and I say that mainly because, like, I don't think it's too far in the future that power is going to be at a real premium. Like the world, it's one of those things. We're going through this period that we've got this energy transition from carbon-based to renewable-based. Renewable is variable renewables, and that's a bit scary in its own right. We've
Totally.
got to build out this infrastructure where the world's electrifying, we've got more electric cars. And at the same time, all of a sudden, we've got the data center that's going to consume an inordinate amount of power. So it's going to be one of those, classic perfect storms. We're going to be in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time going, whoa, what happened there?
Mm.
And so we kind of think it's incumbent upon ourselves to, where you can, and it's not, and this is not like nothing that we're doing or that anyone in this industry is doing is easy. But we kind of believe that we probably should be, where possible, trying to get off our own arse and trying to actually increase the supply of renewables other than just deplete them. Because those renewables, if Brookfield goes and builds, a gigawatt of offshore wind, which is fabulous, I think it's fabulous what Brookfield and all those groups are doing.
Mm.
Um, I mean, they're not just for data centers. They're not just for, watching cat videos. Not that it's all about cat videos, Nick, but they're actually it's to serve everyone and everything, right?
Yeah.
So if the data centers is like, okay, yeah, we'll take that gigawatt, thank you. Well, that's a gigawatt less than everyone else kind of has as we're turning off our coal power stations, and next will be the gas peaking stations, and
Sure.
it'll all happen too fast, I believe. Although obviously it needs to happen, it just needs to happen in an orderly way. So as an example, we've got 3,000 hectares of land out at a place called East Hyden in Western Australia, where Wave Rock is. I don't know if you know Wave Rock,
I know
Nick,
Wave
but anyway,
Rock.
I'll show you later. We'll put it in the notes. And it's very windy and very sunny. Synergy has a 150 megawatt wind farm just out past there. There's 132 kVA lines running through the site going into Perth. And so we are in planning on that. And again, nothing's easy. For a, it will be, depending on the line capacity where that ends up, somewhere between 150 and 300 megawatt, probably wind farm as well. So if we can, what we're trying to build out where we can is to be ideally a net positive energy consumer, which means we're involved in the creation of more renewable energy than we consume at the data
Sure.
center. Now, as you get bigger, it's going to be hard to do. But even if we're just increasing it, we have high hopes, as we all know, which is why everyone thinks often about Perth as a future data center market, which it's yet to fulfill, its promise of that, but we believe it will. But if we can be involved, we don't really want to ever be the builder, owner, operator of a renewable project like that. But if we can be there and we can pick it up and get it going and planning and network connectivity, and then be the direct offtake for it, I call that like a direct PPA.
Yeah.
So we've actually increased the supply before we deplete it.
Sure.
So, and don't get me wrong, others are involved in this too. We're not Robinson Crusoe here, and I'm not sort of saying, wow, this is all original thought. Others are also doing it too, so which is good, because it must be a reasonable idea. But I think that's really important. I think really trying to address that more direct, direct renewables where you can. We're looking at some really bigger stuff now that we're looking where we can, and subject to approvals and so forth, of having, a sort of on or near site sort of solar array and things like that. So you can sort of have that opportunity of behind the meter as well.
Totally. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm halfway through, mate. So that's good.
Well, I was just thinking, how does that play out? Like, you've obviously got the renewables as it relates to solar and wind, and there's hydro down in Tasmania and other that net exports up to the mainland. The energy market there in Australia, I think, is interconnected all but Western Australia. Is there talk of
the world's biggest microgrid?
Yeah, is there talk of getting Western Australia into that into the NEM, the National
above my
Energy Market?
Pascal, Nick, but I look, I've heard people talk about it. I have no idea. I probably wouldn't bet the farm it's going to happen anytime soon. But again, it could happen tomorrow, Nick.
Yeah.
I don't really know. It is unique over there, and like everywhere. And I think we can, there's challenges everywhere. The utilities are going through, even without us and the data centers breathing down their neck about we need more power. They're going through this energy transition anyway, even without us. So there's so many challenges involved in that, and trying to decarbonize grids and things like that. At the same time, we're coming, and everyone probably other than Mark Gansey is underestimating how much power the data center is going to consume. Like, I was kind of saying a year or plus ago that, by 2030, it's probably like 20, but could be like 10 to 20%, which is a big range.
Yeah.
I think it's easily going to be that. Like, it's going to be shocking. Like, it's kind of going to be all the available mass power. And the reason I mentioned, excuse me, Nick, Mark Gansey was a few weeks ago, he came out, which I thought was really, really interesting and very much echoed my own kind of thoughts. Although his was maybe even a bit more aggressive. He sort of went on record and said he believes that within the next 2 years, the sort of large pockets of available power for new big data center projects will probably be gobbled up. I kind of sense he was probably more referring to the Northern Hemisphere. And that's sort of our takeaway, the few trips I've had to the States, we're caught up with you over in GTC and all that kind of stuff. Is it a constrained power market? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a big market, and that's a real generalization. And I hear more anecdotally that Europe is maybe even worse. And I kind of think that in many ways, Nick, is one of the opportunities for Australia and for Australian operators like ourselves and all the other great operators out there, that Australia still has some deep, relatively deep pockets of power with very large capacity. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest places in the world for availability of renewables, and probably wish we had more sort of pumped hydro renewables. But certainly, is it windy and sunny? Yeah. Offshore wind, yes. All that kind of stuff. So there's some I think there's some real, and this is the interesting thing about timing. If we were here having this conversation a few years ago and it was sort of traditional compute and it was all sort of AZ based, and I mean, could you really support North America from here? Like, no, it's not
Yeah.
the way the world worked then. But all of a sudden, here comes AI, and certainly from that model training perspective, notionally those workloads can live anywhere. It's notional. You've got to be able to still service them and have highly skilled data engineers and the like. So you can't go and put them in the middle of sort of Nairobi desert or something. But I think that does open up the opportunity for certain regions that probably weren't ever really considered before at a large scale to then provide, and even Australia servicing Singapore and Southeast Asia. We're hearing notionally that even Malaysia's done a wonderful job of servicing Singapore and being the overflow, which makes a lot of sense. It's just over the
Totally.
causeway, of course. Totally. But is Malaysia now having some challenges with water and power? Very possibly.
Well, I mean, look at Singapore. It's tiny, right? Relative,
Hmm.
and there's a large population, and it's very dense, and so the land, the ability to go build data centers, is challenging. So the
Yeah.
traditional air-cooled large facilities use up a lot of floor space, use up a lot of
Yep.
power, and so they've famously had a moratorium there for
Hmm.
years. I think they've only just recently added an extra 300 megawatts in the last
As
month,
a as a
which
green
they've
pathway.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, it's they're sort of taking a slow, a slow approach to kind of opening that back up again. But you could,
Mm.
to your point, you could see the adjacent neighbors to those countries and regions to support things that they might not necessarily be able to do themselves. Just for that reason, just that land reason alone. What do you
Absolutely.
think? We talked about power a lot, and I'm just curious on your thoughts, just just to stay on the topic for one more minute, well, a couple more minutes, is just around nuclear, right? So
Ooh,
nuclear
yeah.
power
Yeah.
seems to be, the
Yep.
let's say logical next step,
Mm.
to sort of, gain a lot of power, rather than building these, like renewables are, cyclical and volatile and variable.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
it's a logical replacement for a coal-fired plant or aluminum
Yep.
smelter, because you have this base load need. And
Mm.
so for everyone, you obviously need that base load to when, everyone needs power and the lights turn on, you need that,
Yep.
across, a kind of a 24-hour period in different degrees, but there's this base load that's needed. And so if the wind don't wind, unless we have a storage option, which
Yeah.
batteries haven't given us the capability to do it.
Yeah.
So what do you
They're
think
not there
about
yet.
nuclear and the appetite in Southeast Asia, let's call it, from your viewpoint in Australia? Has there been much talk about that as a solution, that as a, maybe a non-solution because of its, the
Yeah.
stigmatism around
Yeah.
uh, it? What are your
Um, they're absolutely okay. So I'll start the answer with the power is going to run out a long way before the demand does.
Hmm,
And the power will run out, Nick. So it needs to be more than discussion, and it always starts with discussion. But my fear is we sort of act on this too late, and like everything, there's pros and cons to everything. But the one thing that we know that when it comes to renewables, and if we put it, I'm not sure whether you quite put a nuclear reactor in renewables, but it's not going to
well,
be there's not perfection's not out there. It's going to be a mix. It's a bit like even in the data center, and even from a customer perspective, multi-cloud. Like one, it's not the public cloud wasn't born for every workload. It's not, it's great for a lot of things, wonderful for a lot of things, but it's not perfect for everything. And if we're looking for perfection, well, no, nuclear is not going to work. But I mean, and again, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but it does sound as though that there's been a lot of improvements made. I know when it sort of first came up, I was like, yeah, but doesn't nuclear consume a lot of water because the uranium rod gets superheated
yeah.
and then they pour water on it and then that's what turns the turbines. Turns out it doesn't work like that anymore, Nick. So anyway, and look, there's been some great discussion. Craig Scroggy, the wonderful CEO from NextDC,
Hmm.
he's been very rightly talking about it and trying to bring it into the sort of that
Conversation. Yeah.
conversation and public, sort of awareness and stuff. I think from an Australia perspective, in the mid to late 70s, our then Prime Minister Gough Whitlam enacted, and I think, Nick, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's a legislative a sort of amendment that was made that says basically Australia won't, even though we apparently Australia has more uranium in our ground than any other country in the world, that we can't dig it out, we can't enrich it, we can't do anything with it ourselves. We can sell it to others and they can do it.
Sure.
So, mate, we need to do something. Like, should that be part of the suite of the mix? Absolutely, it should be. And you know what? It will be.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. The power is going to run out. And I'm a fan of candlelight dinners, but not that much. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
nice occasionally, not all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, trying to cook dinner with a single cigarette
Yeah,
lighter is probably a little
correct.
challenging.
A
Um,
dolphin torch. Yeah, it's not that good.
that's funny. Actually,
Yeah.
just made me think about camping in Australia as a kid. It was always
Mm.
it just rained and rained and rained, and you'd be sitting there around
Yeah.
the campfire or
Yeah.
around the stove trying to just get
Yeah.
warm, and it was just and it
Yep.
just you go for 5 days and turn up home in two because you're just wet and miserable.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
such
Absolutely.
is camping on the east coast of Australia in at Easter time. Um,
Yeah.
that's
And,
funny.
and, and look, and I think, to be honest, for me, like, if I'm running the show or something, I'd be like, emission targets are important, and it's great. That's where it's got to start. It needs to turn into, oh guys, the power's going to run out. So we need to fix it. It's not, if we just leave it as, oh, we're just going to try and do this because we're trying to hit a target and whatever. There's conjecture about that, right? There's you can make arguments that the target's not right, or the power's going to run out. We need to
Yeah,
fix it. How about that?
it's a different goalpost. Yeah,
It's a different goalpost. The power is going to run out. Like, we are not building the infrastructure. Like, I'll just use Australia as an example. For us to hit our 2030 renewable emissions target goal, we have to build out about 10,000 kilometers of overhead power, high tension, high power lines
distribution. Yeah,
to connect the proposed, which by the way aren't being approved. You know what, Nick? This is the scary thing that not many people are talking about. If you're out there right now and you have a site for a wind or solar farm, the chances are it's not economically viable anyway. So that's a challenge, isn't it? And then the other challenge is then you've got Joe Biden, and I think his really wonderful IRA package over in North America. And I think what a great way to, I don't know everything about that policy, but what a great way to kickstart and focus and have, real, an economic impact and solution over there. So my understanding, very, very broadly, is you build out a big wind or solar or renewable, whatever it is, over there, and the day that you send an electron, Uncle Joe writes a check for about half your capital cost. Here you go. And I think there's other benefits with it. So
yeah.
guess where
There
all the
was. I was going to say
so
there's
guess where
something
all the
actually.
money's
I
going.
just I read about that. There was a 60 Minutes story on this just over the weekend.
Yeah.
I'll link it in the comments, which I've never done before, so that's just a new thing that I'm saying. I'll link it
Yeah.
in the comments below. But
Yeah.
essentially, there's the discussions about that in Wyoming, and there's this huge wind farm being deployed, and it's exactly what you just described, right? So it's
Yeah. So that's where the money's going. And then you look at here, and like, from a regulatory perspective, like I mentioned our project in East Hyden. So when Urbis, who are a really wonderful, planning outfit here in Australia, who have done a lot of approvals and projects, wind, solar, all those kind of things all over the country. And when they gave us the program, this is the program, and they gave this to us sort of last year, late last year, and it was all things going really, 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 really well. We'll be sending electrons in 2030. So that was from 2023 to 2030. So that's just to get the project going, and that's everything going really, really well. Like, we
and as
need
you
to,
know, these things aren't smooth.
yeah,
They're not on time. It's
absolutely. It's kind of like we need to be like truth telling, like what we're all planning with. Like, we're not going to get, like, if you just want to keep it about emission targets, we're not going to get there.
yeah.
Like, the way we're going right now in Australia, we are not going to get there. We're not built. The renewable projects aren't being approved, and then the infrastructure to actually, when they are approved and built, is not being built at a speed to enable them. It's great having a 300 megawatt wind farm out in the middle of nowhere. You've actually then got to get it into the grid where the people
Totally.
are.
The
So
distribution, I think people just that's a very different
absolutely,
concept to like
absolutely
building something versus
correct.
making it useful and usable.
Yeah,
Because like you
yeah,
said, like it takes a long time to build overhead
mm,
power lines, like,
yeah,
like really high voltage,
yep,
cables.
yep,
All the permits you need to run it over the length of distance, like it's just
yeah.
a huge undertaking.
It
Um,
is. And
yep,
then what will happen? So then the best case scenario is the coal burners stay on longer. And we've just seen the biggest, what I believe is the biggest coal-powered power station in the country just got renewed, like just got sort of its life extended because it has to, because we're
yep,
not building out the infrastructure. We're not enabling ourselves the opportunity. And everyone's looking at historical data. Again, what we're seeing of the demand for the data center and from the hyperscaler and stuff like that, like bye bye all available power. It's all gone.
yeah,
So we need to. I think there needs to be more truth telling. So I appreciate very much that you brought up the nuclear and all those options. They've got to be brought out now. They've got to be thought through very carefully and practically. And is it economically viable? Cyros just came out recently and said it's not even economically viable. Well, let's get that cross checked. Let's get that triple checked. Let's, you know what I mean? All these kind of things because we need to find viable solutions to keep the lights on.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be sitting here of a candlelight podcast.
Mm.
Um, and so
And worse, we'll get the blame for it as an industry. And it's a
think
big,
about
broad
all the
industry.
cat videos, Walt. Think about the cat videos.
I know. Think about the cat.
What's going to happen to the cat videos?
True.
So that's really cool. So then, so with Green Square, coming back to sort of what you're up to and what you're doing and what you're creating, how has
Yep.
it been, coming into that market as a new entrant, as a differentiated product offering, both
Yeah.
from, I guess, the
Yeah.
sentiment from funding and getting access to
Yeah, no,
capital
mate,
and that sort of
it's
side, but equally to
challenging,
the players that
challenging,
are
challenging.
there. Have they been
Yeah.
nice and friendly and, warm hugs all
Oh,
around?
yeah. You know what? I've got to say, I'll start from the beginning. From an industry, like, and again, property, especially in Sydney, not everyone is the most wonderful, friendly, lovely person. And I'm sure it's not the case in the data center, but even from my earliest experience in this sector, it's really broadly full of good people from CEOs down. So no, like honestly, everyone's been friendly and supportive as what one could expect. And I also think like, the amount of demand, like Nick, I've never seen a demand and supply fundamental so out of kilter. I've
Yeah,
never seen it before, and I may never see it again. So look, I don't think anyone's really shaking in their boots about this Green Square DC, whatever it might be. You know what I mean? Because everyone is so busy. Everyone has got so much on it, and if you've worked, if you've earned your stripes and you're worth your salt, you're busy enough, and you got
yeah,
enough on your plate and all that kind of stuff. Again, there's a planet of work out there, right? But at the same time, have we found it easy? Bro, no, God no, God no. It's a challenge, but you know what? Anything that the light of the tunnel can be so bright and you can have such a profound impact is not meant to be easy. Let's be
true.
honest. But I sort of do find that it's, and we've now had the opportunity to discuss, ourselves and what we do, and I guess what we bring to the table with a lot of, a bunch of kind of enlightened deal teams from different, PE and infra funds and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. And it's interesting. It's interesting. Like when you're an early stage, you're not for everyone. But I kind of think as well, I sort of feel as though that a lot of they're sort of like they want it fully gift wrapped. They want it fully de-risked, but we're still going to offer, but we're still going to treat you like your early stage. But we want it for, it's a bit like, and I think especially in Australia, it's almost like we've kind of lost that kind of risk appetite.
Sure.
And don't get me wrong, you and no one just wants to blindly write blind
Blank
checks and
checks.
stuff,
Yeah.
of course. But I think when your risk is mitigated and you've got a pathway to something that is meaningful and profound and the things that we're bringing to the table, I'm a bit like, again, we're not going to be for everyone where we are right now. I know we will be. I know what we're going to do and what we're going to bring to the table and all that kind of stuff. And there will be some deal teams out there that'll be like, oh, we should have dug a little bit deeper on this. But that's the way it is, right? So no, it's been hard. I remember the great Robin Cooter I just read in the paper a year or so ago. He was speaking. It might have been an AFR event or something, and he was making comment of that because he went through his trials and tribulations that
Totally.
seemed to have worked out okay. And he
He's
was
doing
talking
all
about, I
right.
think he's all right. And he was talking about, that risk appetite in Australia. And I think he was reflective of his, early journey and stuff. And yeah, look, it's hard, but it's not meant to be easy at the same time. And if you're going to make it, you've got to persevere. You've got to be able to deal with all of that and adversity and keep rolling with the punches. And that's what I've done my whole life, Nick. So I'm
Yeah.
not, I'm a little surprised, but it won't make any difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Have you is there interest? We haven't really talked about like customers, like an ideal customer or an ideal, thing. I mean, a data center can be anything to everyone, just like we talked about. It can be
Yeah.
focused on AI, high density, commoditized compute, everything in
Mm.
between, for like a colo for someone to come in and host their racks and their infrastructure. Do
Mm.
you does Green Square have an interest in doing work with the government, with I guess like
Yeah,
classified data and dealing with?
yeah. Oh, look, yes, but at the same time, let's be honest. To get to that level of, especially if you're level 4 scare, like whatever it might be, that's probably a little bit further down the path. You know what I mean? Like we've got our initial customers, which that's not part of, and we're going to earn our stripes. And then build up into that. And I will say this, Nick, about the AI market segment is it looks as though, and let's be honest, we're still pretty early into this, and even I think even the big hyperscalers are still, kind of, and certainly enterprise are still working out how it's going to,
Totally.
what the playbook is and all that kind of stuff. But it certainly looks and feels as though that there's an opportunity for a lot broader customer base. I think I think if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, and there's this GreenSquareDC, who's this new platform thing, and we want to be in the big end of town, and we want to be dealing with hyperscalers. Well, maybe that many customers, if we're being honest. But I kind of feel as though in this space, there's an opportunity for a lot more. I sense that there might be uh, kind of in a way more notional hyperscalers. I think the big incumbents will get bigger, and that's great. But I think there will be, and even look, I think between private cloud, sovereign cloud,
Yeah,
that's a big one, Nick. Don't underestimate what that
totally
is
agree.
going to be and what that's going to mean. It's going to be huge. And enterprise, it's going to be really interesting to see how enterprise deploys. I think many enterprise probably realize that on-prem enterprise doesn't always pay dividends. Um, the public cloud, if your model training is probably not for everyone, from a cost, from a privacy, from a transparency, and again from that sovereign perspective as well, that probably doesn't work for everyone all the time. Which then that throws up more of that sort of private cloud opportunity. So I think there'll be a much broader base, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you look at, and this is a real generalized comment, but I think if you look at that traditional cloud hyperscaler business model, which again didn't work pretty well for everyone. But
Yep.
I think if you actually take a step back and you really look at it, it's probably characterized by a sort of certainly a high growth, high volume, relatively low margin perspective. And as we kind of saw historically, those margins were sort of getting a little bit more compressed and a little bit more compressed. Again, not that anyone was really complaining. It worked fine. But I kind of think just for the next while, and it won't be like this forever, but I think there's an opportunity there to be in a market that again is characterized by sort of by a high growth, high volume, and a higher margin. Because, and I just speak of that from just a supply and demand. What sets pricing, Nick? it's supply and demand.
Really.
If there's really high demand and there's a constrained supply, which I think the day that ChatGPT 3 dropped, how many like over 10 megawatt data centers were there that were like AI enabled, sort of, GPU ready?
That didn't exist,
Like exactly. Our friends over at Q Scale, they were coming out of the ground. They're fabulous. They're awesome. At North, maybe in the Nordics. I'm starting to run dry after that. I'm
Well,
sure
and
there are
that's
probably others, right? But
yeah, but I mean, obviously since then, right? So there's been just a huge growth of all these
yeah,
companies, the money that's sloshing around into that
yeah,
infrastructure, into those data centers, and
yeah.
quickly building up this huge amount of compute, which, I had
Mm.
Rob Coyle from OCP on
Yeah,
the podcast
yeah, let's do
recently, and
that.
he was talking about
Right.
the level of compute is, that's already out there is, for the level of demand, it's like 3x the volume for
Mm.
the last 5 years, we need 3x of that now, right? Like
Yeah,
it just this
yeah,
step change.
yeah,
And you got
yeah.
to obviously, build that. You got to you don't just build that tomorrow. It takes months, and data centers
Correct.
can take years to
Correct.
build. So I was
Yeah.
curious as to, you're in Sydney, you're going into Sydney, into the brownfield site.
Mm.
And what's next after Sydney? Like, is it Sydney 2? Is it
Mate,
Melbourne? Is it
we're there for
is it
Perth whenever it pops, whenever it happens.
and then
We're
Perth?
there. And look, we feel we don't know anyone probably anything more than anyone else, but it's we found that recent public Google announcement about their big subsea cable plans coming down the east coast of the African continent across to Perth, and that's then connected to the rest of the world. There's a whole kind of retooling and re-networking for various reasons of our global sort of subsea cable routes, and I think that will be telling in time. I really do think that Perth, and I think Darwin is a big sleeper, and I think Darwin is probably, and we don't have any exposure to Darwin at this point in time, but I think they both have real opportunity to kind of supply. And again, now that these workloads can be more mobile,
Hmm.
can and they'll kind of gravitate to where power is available and has real capacity. And it's got to be globally competitive. No one's going to go there if it's not. And one thing that WA has got is really competitive power,
Sure.
and it has to have the ability to either be green or become green, or have that input in there as well, which unfortunately has an impact on cost, and that's just the way it is. And look, WA's got that in spades, and when you look at its connectivity into Southeast Asia, and then what we're kind of seeing, what's going to sort of come around the globe and down the African continent, we know that Africa is a huge growing market, but has its challenges if you want to be over there. And so for certain workloads, not for every workload, of course, can
Sure.
can can WA and to a lesser extent Darwin, be one of those real hosts, even if it's a redundancy perspective, whatever it's going to be. We think WA has got a huge future, but it's not there yet. But we've got big plans for WA for when it does happen. And look, Victoria is another one. Victoria is one that has some really deep pockets of available power with some really interesting resiliency inputs to, I could put that better maybe, but and also some really great renewable opportunity too. So
Yeah.
that's really us. So we see ourselves, I don't know, we've sort of been talking for a while. We've got to do more doing, but that's about to happen. So it's really Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and we earn our stripes, and then we look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And Southeast Asia is a big market, and we'll go where we're needed and wanted, and we look forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. What are your what's your feeling around, we talked about, like, Middle East, Southeast Asia, African continents and workloads and things. And so large data centers for training is kind of, a pretty good known use case for this generative AI need, right? So it's these large data
Yep.
centers, tons of compute,
Yep.
throw it in there and just burn it for 3 months, and then at the other side you have a trained model, and that's nice. But then you have the inferencing tail on the other end of AI,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the latency needs of those requests are
Here we
more
go.
and more latency latency-sensitive
Yes.
for the workload. And so,
Mm.
like, how I have always kind of seen it is like, those large multi-megawatt or like tens and hundreds of megawatt data centers become kind of, those campuses become training facilities and the AI factories as it relates to
Mm.
like the industrial kind of workloads,
Yep.
those big foundational models and those really large scale kind of workloads. And then you're going to have the I wouldn't say the opposite of that, but a smaller, more bespoke modular data centers that are scattered, almost like sprinkled across, continents
Yeah.
and states and
Yeah.
countries, where
I,
that compute is not
yep.
only replicated with,
Yep.
fiber and interconnected over a private network, but
Mm.
that local edge compute is being done by, a subset of that,
Yeah.
both power and intensity of size.
Yeah.
And then you can have things like, direct chip cooling and immersion cooling and things, because
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're up in Darwin, as an example,
Mm.
highly humid, highly high temperature
Mm.
for a lot of the year, then your cost to do that with air conditioning and traditional air
Mm.
cooling facilities is very high, as it is
Yeah.
through the further north you go into the equator belt. And so the how I see it is that that kind of equator belt to some degree becomes kind of where that next generation cooling can be most effective.
Yep.
Equally, it actually is effective in the far north and south where it's cold, because you can reuse the heat more effectively as well. And
Yeah.
there's actually a use case for that versus, you're in Abu Dhabi and it's like, you want some more heat? What can I sell it
Mm.
to you? And
I
everyone's like, well,
know.
no, thank you. That's really
Yeah.
unhelpful.
We got plenty.
We got some of that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I sort of see that distribution of the inference workloads and,
Yep.
and demand becoming as important, if not more,
Mm.
over time, as that tail is a very long and
Yeah.
important part of the generative AI story.
So what you're saying, Nick, is this could finally be the edge, whatever edge is, could be
Yeah.
its coming out. This could be when we finally go, oh, right, okay, this is what edge does, and this is
Yeah,
this is what it can
exactly. It's a
do.
reimagination and
Yeah,
redefinition of edge, and
yeah,
it's green edge
yep,
DC, or it's
yeah,
green box DC or something. Smaller.
whatever it is. And look, I think in
I'll
truth, we're
happily
kind
work
of
in your marketing team. This is going great.
this is good. Absolutely, mate. You know you're on board, Nick. Um, yeah, look, we're so early into it that I'm sure no one can probably hand on heart say that's exactly what's going to happen. But it does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Uh, I do. I
you just
do.
apply logic to it, and you can get some pretty logical
Yeah,
outcomes, right? I mean, it just sort of,
absolutely.
yeah. um
Yeah. Yep. Yep. The spoken wheel model. So yeah, and look, the Firmuses of the world, and I know you know reasonably well that again, I think they're doing fabulous anyway. But I think for groups like them and others, yeah, I think it could be a real opportunity for them and for that model. Yeah, I do tend to agree.
yeah, yeah. Well, great. Anything else I didn't ask you? Any other interesting tidbits and knowledge? And I'm sure you've got other experiences and things that are bubbling around. You may want to share or not.
I don't have much time for
Maybe
much
for
else
next
at the
time.
moment.
We'll keep some cool stuff for next time.
I only got look. I only got up to three of my five.
Oh
Five
gosh,
pillars.
let's
I
revisit that.
know. No, I've got to learn how to do that faster. I
Oh,
really do.
no
Maybe
worries.
that's so.
Okay,
But
well,
anyway,
we'll
there's
revisit.
two
We'll do
more.
a take two.
We're removing diesel fossil fuels from operation wherever possible with HVO 100, and we're also looking to optimize where we can the overall efficiency of the data center with AI, but more probably like ML AI, machine learning AI,
Yeah.
taking a leaf out of what evidently Google and DeepMind did in 2016 when they optimized their cooling and apparently got about a 40% efficiency out of that. So I think that, if you're going to be an AI data center, well, you probably should sort of be using AI as well,
Are you talking about as it relates
as
to
an overlay.
BMS and DCIM and stuff like that? So
All that
essentially
kind of
just,
stuff.
okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So algorithmic based,
Yeah.
pre and post kind of
Yes.
changes to the electrical
And
system and cooling.
And when you have more inputs, it enables we've explored things like, aquifer cooling and things like that. You can have sort of AI that then determines whether are we, is it free air cooling or, like those kind of things. The more, if you have a behind the meter bears, if you have different things, it can help optimize those, just to optimize just a pure 100% air cooled data center. There's still benefit in it, clearly,
Yeah.
but the more inputs you have, the more opportunity you have to optimize, and that's where that sort of ML AI sort of really comes into its own. And that's really nothing that new about that, by the way. Anyway, so that's it. I got through the five.
There you go.
Yeah, I got
You just
there.
didn't want to talk to me again. I see what's going on. You
No,
just
it's not all the case at all, mate. Come on, we'll talk more about
we can
edge.
have we can talk about different things next time. We'll
Yeah,
come
yeah,
up with some
yeah.
different topics. But
Yeah.
mate, it's
When
been a
everyone else
pleasure.
pulled out again, you get me on.
Exactly. Well, just come over to North America and we'll catch up
Yeah,
again, or I'll
love it.
pop out with the
Yeah.
family to see. But mate, pleasure talking to you.
Of course.
It's been great to get to know both you and Green DC or Green Square DC, I should say, and understand what's been happening and what
Yeah,
differently, and
the journey.
excited to see what you guys are come to market and kind of add a lot of value to what is a really interesting industry. So
It
and
is.
all
It
that
is.
knowledge in from real estate and do some cool stuff.
Absolutely, mate. I think it's always been an interesting industry, and I think right now it is uber interesting, isn't it?
Red hot. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It
Cool.
is.
Well,
All
mate,
right, mate. Thank you so very, very much.
absolute pleasure, mate. All the best and we'll catch up
Thank
soon.
you. Love your work, mate. Thanks,
Yes, mate.
Nick.
Cheers.
See you, my man. See you, mate.
Bye.
Bye.